Welcome to Faith in Media. This is the podcast where we discuss everything that is faith and that to do with media. Today we're joined, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest for today, Cole Moreton. How are you? Thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm really well, Carla, and I'm really pleased to be with you.
We're here for various reasons, but I think I don't really know where to start because there's just so much to be able to touch on with regards to yourself, the work that you do. Maybe you'd like to give us just a little introduction of yourself. And I always think it's best that when our guests do it, it's a lot better than when we try to tell people what you are.
Yeah. I use that trick too, Carla. I've been a journalist since I was 16, actually. And that's more than a few years ago. But at the moment, in my career, I was executive editor at the Independent on Sunday. I wrote for the Guardian and the Financial Times. At the moment, I divide my time between half the time is spent doing cover interviews for a magazine called Weekend, which is the Saturday magazine for the Mail, right? And then the rest of the time, I write and present programs for Radio 4, documentaries, quite often on human interest or social issues. A lot of stuff on refugees lately, a lot of stuff about trying to understand different communities. And books, Everything is Extraordinary is the new one. And speaking and facilitating and trying to get people to come together and share their stories with each other. So that's kind of my life professionally. Personally, I live on the South Coast. I'm an East End boy, born and bred. But when we had triplets, we ran away to the seaside to get a bit of air.
What was that like, receiving the news that you were going to expect not one, but three for the price of one? How was that?
Well, we already had one. We had a 4-year-old already. It was hard. I'm not gonna really put icing sugar on this. It was obviously a great blessing. Clearly, yes. We had been trying for a long time to have kids. But it's a bit like that old fable, be careful what you wish for. You know?
It's beyond a double portion with that, I think.
Yeah, it was a huge challenge, really. Actually, I can point people, if you really want to know what it was like, I did a 3-part radio documentary for Radio 4 called The Power of Three, all about it, which is still on BBC Sounds. So,
amazing. I will be looking that up. That I imagine is a fascinating story. You've already kind of given us kind of like a basic overview of really your power, or your superpower has been through this ability to not only tell stories, but highlight and help others to illuminate their story. Why has this been such a focal point for you? And from 16 years old, did you know that this was always a call for you? How did you get into this to begin with?
There's 2 answers to that. The first one is that I come from community, working class people in the East End of London, very multicultural community, very poor but very happy. But one of the defining things for us in the East End in the 70s and 80s was that people like us were not allowed to do things and were not allowed to be heard, were not considered that our voices were worth hearing. Even though there'd been that great kind of social revolution in the 60s and lots of grammar school boys and girls had found their way into the media and so on, there was and still is a really nasty class element to the media and to that whole kind of world. And so I didn't, quite the opposite. Instead of, as some people do, feeling sort of born to do this, I felt born excluded from this.
Wow.
And there was a laughably called a careers officer at my school. My school was dreadful, actually. Again, I can't pretend. It was awful, and I was desperate to leave. And there was a careers officer who said to me when I was 15, "What do you want to do for a living?" And I wanted to be David Bowie actually at the time, but I couldn't really say that. So I said, "I want to be a writer." And he honestly said to me, and I can still see his face, "So does everybody else. What do you really want to do? I think the best you can hope for is working in a bank."
Wow.
That was in March. And in June, I joined the local paper as an apprentice reporter. I think about him a lot.
I can see that. Isn't that interesting how that interaction has literally set the trajectory for your life? That is incredible.
Yeah. And in fact, the local editor came to the school, and he was talking about if you become a journalist, you might be able to be like Michael Parkinson, who was the big chat show host at the time. Now, the first question there is, if that's true, why are you talking to a bunch of oiks in the school and not off there being Michael Parkinson? But he was doing his community thing, and it really spoke to me actually, because Michael Parkinson had just interviewed Muhammad Ali, and I really wanted to be Muhammad Ali. I mean, everybody did. He was the coolest man in the universe, right? But there were a couple of problems with that. One is that I didn't like hitting people, and the other one was I didn't like getting hit.
Slight issue there. Slight.
So I figured, well, why don't I be the person who's talking to Muhammad Ali? That sounds good. So when the editor said, does anybody want to come on work experience? Nobody put their hand up at all. And I was too shy in the meeting to put my hand up. But as he was going out the door, I sort of circled around and said, yeah, I'll come. And there's a story in the book about the first thing that I ever did for that paper when I was on work experience, which was pretty spectacular and involved gangsters and Britain's two most dangerous men. But we don't need to go into that. If people can buy the book for that. But anyway, the point is I ended up not doing A-levels at this terrible school, figuring that doing an apprenticeship would be a better thing to do. And spending 4 years training with them, at which point I then went off to work. I joined Youth with a Mission, actually. I'd had my conversion, and I was new in the faith, and I went off and joined Youth with a Mission, and then spent a couple of years travelling around the world, writing about relief and development work in all sorts of places, Asia and Africa and all over.
Wow.
So that was how I sort of got into the kind of lower levels of this thing. The second part of it, though, I mean, that gives me a kind of impetus to try to help people from those same kind of backgrounds to get heard. It also gives me an interest in telling stories that wouldn't otherwise be told. But in terms of when did I know, I sort of flailed around. I came back from YWAM. I went to university. I freelanced for a bit. And it was on my 30th birthday. I was asked by the church I was going to in Holloway to do a live storytelling. We had this Monday, Thursday service where we would have a meal, but in between parts of the meal, people would stand up and act out parts of the story of the betrayal. And they said, right, we want you to do the final bit in the Garden of Gethsemane. And so we all stood outside the church, and we'd all packed up everything already. So the sign was that when the story finished, instead of speaking to each other, people would just drift off into the night, like the disciples must have done. So I told the story of Jesus' betrayal in the garden, the soldiers coming, Peter, put up your sword, and betrayal with a kiss. And then talked about everyone scattering, and everybody scattered. And to do that, I'd rehearsed and got myself into the Bible story and tried to understand what people were doing there at any given moment. And then when I was walking back home from the tube station, I had this absolute sense of peace and settling that this is what you're supposed to do. Tell stories, connect people through stories. And that's where it began.
Wow. I love that you've shared that's such a beautiful and simple kind of, it's like step by step. Like you said, not everybody has there's this profound moment. I just feel this huge calling, a neon light, like arrow coming from heaven or anything like that. But it's just following the breadcrumbs of what was available to you. Also because you defied someone to begin with, like, please don't put me in a box. And how those breadcrumbs led you to something so profound and so simple, and you have kind of used that ability to connect people through the power of storytelling in such a wide way. You started out as a journalist, you're now an author as well. And we've got to what we're talking about today is your new book that's just been released, Everything is Extraordinary, which is an incredible book. And of all of the stories that I've read so far, I love it. Big plug there. You know, the reviews have just been flying. I'm going to actually just quote one right now. It says, Cole is a transcendent storyteller. His talent for noticing the beauty of the minutiae of every day and painting it into wonderful prose for us all to share is testament to not only the wonder all around us, but also within us. What an incredible review,
Wow,
firstly.
where's that from? I've not
I
heard that.
will let you know, but this is how people are speaking about your work. And I love that you shared with us the starting point from where this all began to what this has become in your most recent body of work here. It's not an easy thing to do. I think many of us have aspirations for being a storyteller. I see myself as a storyteller. In fact, this medium is one of my opportunities to connect people's stories like you, to elevate them. I find so much power and peace in that. How did you find yourself fine-tuning it? What was it like when you started out? Was it always like it is now? Or was there a journey to its development and kind of its refinement for you?
Are you talking about the actual process of storytelling?
Your process of storytelling, yes.
Mm. Well, I mean, I'm old, Carla.
You are not.
But I am in my 50s, and which means the one thing I do have in my favour, apart from the fact that my body doesn't work in the way that it used to, is that I do have experience. So one element of the answer to your question is that this particular book and this way of telling stories is the product of 25 or 30 years of trying to work it out, how to do it, doing it over and over again. That age-old thing about, you know, the way to become something is to do it. I always say to people, you know, people say I want to be a writer. I said, well, then write something down, you know, because so often people are talking about it and not doing it. But in the last 30 years, I've been a national newspaper editor. I've been a feature writer. I've written about crime and in war zones and about poverty and inequality. I've also done a lot of showbiz. I've also interviewed a lot of famous people. And so what I was trying to do with Everything is Extraordinary was to say, okay, having had all of that experience, what therefore have I learned about human connection and how we connect? I think the intro says how we connect with each other, with ourselves, with nature, and with the divine. And I add the caveat in there, if you believe in that, because some readers I know coming to it won't, but I absolutely passionately do. So it's about where do we find that spark between humans and the divine, and where have I found it in my history as an interviewer and feature writer and public speaker and facilitator. And so what I tried to do is to take 18 stories of encounters with various people. As you know, some of them are world famous and some of them you won't have heard of. And each one of them is treated equally because I totally believe in the gospel truth of that each of us is precious. And each of them is given a hearing, and each of them brings to the encounter some wisdom or some experience or something that we can learn about how to be a better human. And it just struck me so powerfully as I was beginning to think about how do I write this, that I learn through story. You know, the things that move me are things that involve me, that make me empathize and enter into a situation. I'm not a theorist, I'm not a thinker really, but I do love a story and I respond to a story. So I thought, well, the best way to try and share some of what I've learned is to do it through a bunch of stories.
And you've shared that you've done obviously journalism, you're an interviewer. Is there a different kind of facet of storytelling that you're employing in all of these different kind of platforms, or do you find yourself employing the same kind of method and approach? What's different, or what's the same between all of those?
There are some commonalities. You know, there are some things that are absolutely true of any moment when you encounter a story. You'll know this very well yourself, whether it's a movie or a phone call. You know, there is a protagonist who wants something and they're trying to get it and they will be thwarted and then they'll overcome that and they'll rise up towards it, and then they'll be thwarted again, and then they'll rise up further. And depending on the nature of your story, they may have a happy ending, or they may be left in limbo. That little kind of jagged diagram of progress and thwarting. For those who are listening, that's like a Toblerone bar, if you like. That, I think, is the DNA of our lives at the moment, because our lives are rich with storytelling, on social media, in the media, to each other. So that, I think, is in common. And I with students, sometimes I go on a deep dive into what is happening there. But there's also, you have to also acknowledge that I've been working across various different mediums. So, you know, when I'm doing a Radio 4 program, for example, the conversations that I might have with people are a lot like this one. You'd be very good at that, Carla. When I'm doing a journalistic kind of political interview, it would be very different. So there is, you know, you do have to tailor your kind of interview style and everything to the situation. But I said something to journalism students which shocked them. I stand by it though. When somebody asked me in a journalism kind of class, this is the actual words they use: how do you trick people into giving you the good stuff?
Great question. I will be asking that as well in the class.
Yeah, you probably would. I said, you don't. That's a profound misunderstanding of what the interview process is like. Okay, because, you know, when you're interviewing somebody super famous, for example, you know, you're not going to get into the room unless people around that person trust you to be sensitive about what happens in that room. So actually, this whole thing is a collaboration. You know, there's maybe a dozen different people involved at different levels until you're sitting face to face. But more than that, this is the bit that shocked them. I said to the, you know, because what I'm known for in my kind of journalism at the moment, in terms of doing interviews with people, is a lot of it is arts and culture. But in every interview that I do, there will always be what they call a news line. There'll always be something that is going to attract people's attention, rather than it just being a kind of, you know, sycophantic little exchange. But I said to the students, that doesn't matter. The news line doesn't matter. The headline doesn't matter. The boss doesn't matter. Your job doesn't matter. Journalism doesn't matter. What matters is that when you sit down and talk to somebody, you're two human beings having an encounter beyond all of that. And so you've got to honour that. You've got to respect that. And how that might come out is, you know, I interviewed somebody once, and one of my questions was about their mum, and something profound had happened to their mum that morning. And it was somebody, I didn't use it in the interview, so I won't say who it is, but it was somebody like a household name. And they began to cry in the middle of the interview, and I said, look, you know, I'm going to stop this because I don't want to exploit that. Do you want a moment? Do you want to stop? Shall we just forget it and come back another day? And because I said that, they went, no, I think we'll carry on. I mean, they might have just gone. I took that risk. They might have just gone home, and I might have had to face my boss, and I might have got the sack. But that's not important, really. The importance is the connection between the two people in the room. So that runs through everything. Whether I try not to do any journalism that contradicts that, or to act in any way as a journalist that contradicts that. And of course, that comes from faith. That comes from what we believe in and how we believe that we should behave towards each other.
You've shared, I think, on numerous occasions in other interviews, and especially in the book, which I found really beautiful, particularly the story when you're at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, about you've had your experiences where faith has been challenged. And I wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that journey, and also through all of that, even from kind of what you've shared so far, that this is now a very strong, bright, burning flame inside you when it comes to faith. What has been the thing that has anchored you through this journey? Please share what you can about that.
What has been the thing that has anchored me? That's a very good question that ask myself every day, where is my own car?
And I imagine this is a question we all have to ask ourselves, because I don't
Oh,
think
right.
anybody does not have a journey when it comes to the element of faith.
No, no.
You
But
know?
it's certainly changed for me over the years. Let me sketch it out. I come from a family, my sort of extended family are all in the Salvation Army. So as I was growing up, I was familiar with the language of the Salvation Army in East London, familiar with its social justice history, familiar with its hymns
Mm.
and outdoor meetings, and I love my grandparents very much. My granddad, actually, his story is the beginning of my story, really. He was 15 years old. He was a villain, really, bit of a chancer in South London, around Camberwell area, and the son of a rag and bone man. I mean, pretty much in social circles in that time, the lowest of the low, really. He saw an open air meeting, and he followed the band to the hall. And as he went into the hall, a woman who he perceived to be, he perceived her to be posh, several rungs on the social ladder above him, extended a hand and shook his hand and said, "You're welcome here." And that handshake propelled him into a faith that sustained him till his death at the age of
Wow.
90. Because he thought, why would a woman like that shake the hand of a piece of dirt like me? What is going on here? And as he joined the Salvation Army and became part of that community, and it gave him a set of values that were different to the ones he'd been raised with. There's a Frederick Coots, who was one of the generals of the Salvation Army, wrote in his autobiography the story of putting out chairs with a lowly soldier on a Sunday morning, and it was my granddad. And he said that this young man, who was from low stock, had taught him the truth of the fact that in the presence of God, each of us is as valuable as what did he say? A pauper is as worthy as a king in the kingdom. And that was really strong in my granddad's heart. And so I grew up with that. But then my dad rejected the faith, and was a really fierce atheist, but also a socialist activist, local community activist, councillor in Waltham Forest. So he took the social justice element of the Salvation Army and ran with that, but he left the God side of it behind. And so that was the kind of background. And frankly, Carla, when I was like, I don't know, 16, 17, I was a bit of a mess. I was a bit chaotic, and I was looking for some kind of somewhere, an anchor, as you put it. And I had a really, really old-fashioned tent mission conversion. It was amazing. The evangelist Luis Palau came to do mission to London, and I was sent by the local paper to interview him. I was about 17, I think, and he was like, I'm not going to say anything about him. I did not get on with him. Let's put it that way. But the following week, the mission was still going on, and they had a guy in there, Eric Delve, his name was, it still is, who was doing the mission, and he was English, and he was being groomed, to be the next Billy Graham, and he was fantastic. And then, crucial to what we've been talking about, he was an amazing, amazing storyteller. He was funny. He did the voices. He had incredible timing. He had a kind of Monty Python sense of the absurd. And you can actually listen online to those sermons. I wanted to see if they were as amazing as I thought they were, and they really are. And I interviewed him, and he was just the loveliest man. So he kind of waved me through, and I was in, and I got involved in churches, and being a fierce teenager, thought, well, if it's true, I've got to take it to the absolute nth degree.
The zeal was real.
The zeal was real, yeah. So I joined Youth with a Mission and worked for nothing for a couple of years, and travelled the world and saw what they were doing, and participated in that great missionary experience, and was absolutely certain about my faith and my place in the world and what I needed to tell the world. And in all honesty, and I want to say this carefully because I know many people within that community and within that kind of faith who are wonderful people who I would not want to challenge, but it didn't work for me. In the long run, there was a gap between the certainty that I was being encouraged to have and the difficulties and the ambiguities and struggles of my life, and I couldn't hold the two together. So I then went on a period of questioning. I went to work for the Church Times, and I wouldn't, if you want to be a person of strong faith, I wouldn't recommend that you spend 5 years writing about any religious institution. It's not a good idea. And the story that you're talking about was towards the end of that process when we had struggled for a baby. 7 years struggling for kids. We ended up with 4, which was amazing.
I mean, he gave you more than double for the trouble from the sounds of it. That's incredible.
Yeah.
What a story. What a story.
Buy one, get 3 free. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other conversation for another day about that. But by the time my first arrived, I had lost my faith because I couldn't hold it all together. But I was still hanging around people who were in churches, and I remember holding him as a tiny baby, and he's an IVF child, and he's so hard to get. And I remember holding him at an Ash Wednesday service and rocking him and praying, is this a miracle of faith or a miracle of science? Mm-hmm. And I got a very strong, clear answer. And the answer was yes. It's a miracle of faith or a miracle of science.
Still a miracle.
So there was a kind of ambiguity there. Right? But there was still a relationship with the divine. There was still that sense of closeness. And you asked me what my anchor is. I've gone a long way off towards a kind of a liberal, inclusive kind of faith. But right at the heart of it is a personal relationship with the divine, which I'm not letting go of. This is a very long answer. Is that okay?
Absolutely. This is exactly the story I came for.
Okay, good. So you mentioned the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, and so I just had a realization. It wasn't particularly profound. In 1999, standing at the Western Wall, having lost my faith, I had this realization that here in this space, this geographical space, is where the temple curtain tore in two. It's where Abraham brought Isaac to sacrifice him. It's where Muhammad ascended to heaven on a winged beast. In the Abrahamic tradition faiths, that 100 meter square place, it was absolutely supercharged with stories and connections. And the reflection was, there is some sort of mad fractured dialogue going on between the human and the divine, and a lot of it has happened here. And I can't deny that. In the midst of trying to lose my faith, I can't deny that. So the next question is, well, then what do you do about it? And then the first step of the answer is to say, well, I'm beginning to see that other faiths and paths and traditions might have wisdoms to share with me, and I want to be open to understanding what they are. But I start with my inheritance and with the stories of Jesus and with the idea of an imminent, present, active Holy Spirit. So I started again with that. And so over the last 20 years, I've tried to find communities that allow me to be as passionate and engaged with what you might call the charismatic, with the presence of the Spirit, and to explore the stories of Jesus and who Jesus was, but at the same time to accept that we live in a world where there are now many different traditions and paths to look at and to understand, and some of them are really coming at us with a lot of wisdom. So I'm kind of open and learning, and so this book now is written from perspective of somebody who knows and believes themselves to be in a relationship with Jesus and with God and with the Holy Spirit, but who has seen an awful lot of things in the world, knows the struggles, knows the hurts that people have, and has seen wisdom all over the place, inside religion and outside religion, and seen the Spirit all over the place. So that's my anchor, really, I suppose, the continuing relationship with the divine.
That is just stunning to hear that. And I think so many who come across this conversation will resonate on the principles of that. And I think we are living in a world where you don't have to look far where you see so much struggle, so much pain. And those that are navigating the faith walk, quite as you've described for yourself, and certainly one that I relate to as well, is what centers us. And like you, for me, and many who belong to the Christians in media community, it's centered around Jesus and what he did, what he stands for, and that constant connection that the Holy Spirit is trying to pursue all humanity with. And it is comforting in a time where I think people are constantly looking for hope. So to hear your journey through the written word, and like you said, understanding in our connections with each other in these interactions that you illuminate through your storytelling and through the mediums and kind of areas that you occupy, you bring some of that to our awareness. You show it, you demonstrate it, you shine light on it. And I think that is so helpful to a world looking for answers, looking for what does it look like in a candid way, a very realistic way of navigating that journey. And again, I can't plug it anymore, but absolutely go and find this book. You will be riveted from the opening of the preface onwards, as I have been so intrigued by it. And I love that, you've got like you mentioned before, great stories from very famous people that are household names that we know and that we've grown up with, historically speaking, in our lifetime. And also it's the beauty of the person that we see at the food bank, or the people that shook your grandfather's hand, that is like literally set a tone for my approach and the way that I view the world through a specific type of lens. And that's just done so beautifully there. Tell us a little bit about in your expression. So much is through the written word, and you see how kind of like our world is evolved, and there's a lot of social media. It's all done through either visual or a podcast now. Do you feel kind of excited by the fact that there's more opportunity for storytelling and connection through these mediums, or a little bit kind of sad that it's not quite as focused on the written word, which I still think kind of carries kind of a pedestal of its own, if that makes sense? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on that are that I've always tried to be across platforms. In 2009, I left The Independent because I thought that the way forward was to try and be telling stories across radio, TV, online, social media, and in print. So I made that choice to do that, and it's paid off. What I do think, I'll answer this first of all professionally, right? In the current climate, there are endless possibilities for storytelling. You can tell whatever story you want to tell. The equipment is available in the palm of your hand. What is not available is the potential to get paid for it. Right? And the reason that's important is because if we want investigative journalism, compassionate journalism that brings out the best in humanity and explores, looks for truth and justice, then someone's got to pay for that. Someone's got to say, yeah, actually that is what we want. Let's earn a living doing that. Let's pay someone to do that. So I think that we have a problem in that the storytelling space is kind of being surrendered to people who aren't doing it for the sake of becoming famous, rather than for the sake of some of the things I've just talked about. And in our national media in this country, certain kinds of papers sell a lot of copies still, because certain kinds of people still put their hands in their pocket every day to buy them. And a lot of the people who stand there saying, oh, the media has gone off to the right or is not doing so well, are people who aren't putting their hands in their pockets to pay for good, responsible journalism. So that's my professional belief about it. But what I'm really excited about, as I go into my next kind of phase of all this, is that while we'll be being bombarded with material, while everything is digital, and even this conversation, but everything is digital, still people are hankering after the personal and the intimate and the one-to-one, and nothing is more intimate really than somebody telling you a great story, either whispering in your ear on the radio, or reading to you from a book, or on the pages of a book, or in person with a small group of people. I love to do that. If anybody wants me to come and talk to their group and tell some stories and get other people to share their stories, just let me know. Just get in touch. I'll come. I love
Amazing.
doing that. I love doing that. So I do, like when I'm doing the sessions for Everything is Extraordinary, first half is I always, I tell a story about Scarlett Johansson or Tiger Woods or Nelson Mandela, whatever. And then one about Zara the refugee or Sherry the food bank user. And then I say to people, who's the most remarkable person you've ever met? Could be your mum, could be the milkman, could be somebody who changed your life with a little act of kindness. And so the second half of those sessions are always about encouraging people to tell their stories about things that have happened to them. And when you do that with a group of 20, 30, 40, 50 people, get them to share, you suddenly see this shift in the way that people are. I did a thing on Saturday, and in the middle of it, I said, right, okay, so we're all in this room, but we're not connecting. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to turn and talk you 3 minutes uninterrupted to the person next to you about whatever's on your mind. And that person must not interrupt you. They must just listen. We both do it. 6 minutes later, the room had exploded into this series of connections. People were worried about their mum. People were worried about their rent. And it's just think, all I did was just give you permission to do that. I quote in the book Martin Buber, the Jewish German philosopher, who says that God is the electricity that happens between two people when they begin to see each other and open up who they are. I'm not quite sure that God is the electricity. I'd say God is present in the electricity that happens between those two people. But he's got something. And so I think, to answer your point, I think that right now the exciting thing is in the personal and the one-to-one and the intimate. And if social media can help us to do that or to get together in rooms, then I think it's a great thing.
That's amazing. I really like that kind of view of that. If anything, we can look at it as this is a powerful tool that the idea of storytelling becomes more and more accessible to more people in terms of opportunity. So that is encouraging to hear that. You mentioned...
Can I just...
Yes, of course. No, go for it.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing in relation to people of faith telling stories. Because one of the things that one of the things that gets in the way of people of faith telling stories is that feeling that we need to convert, or we need to persuade, or we need to bring people over to our point of view. It's the same thing that gets in the way of evangelism, by the way, where evangelism in the present climate for people who are not Christians, as soon as they rumble that you're only in it to persuade them to come over to your side, the friendship begins to feel a bit devalued and not worth pursuing. And it's similar with storytelling. So you hit the nail on the head earlier when you talked about showing. What we try to do, if I'm doing Pause for Thought on Radio 2, for example, or telling these stories here, is I try to embody and share the values that come with this faith and what you might do about it, and how that changes the way we are, and talk about love and talk about connection and talk about the divine spark, but hold back on the straightforward attempts to convert people and just let them find their own way. Because similarly to when I was talking about the headline or the job doesn't matter when you're doing an interview, it's about two people connecting. When you're telling stories, it's about you making the connection with the people who are hearing those stories. And you are first and foremost human beings, not first and foremost Christians or Muslims or Jews or atheists, but
Yeah.
human beings making that
Yes.
connection.
Yes.
And it's my passionate belief that when that connection happens, God is present,
Mm.
whatever we call ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. And
Sorry,
I couldn't agree more. I think that's such a beautiful way of understanding that very specific approach, because people are not projects, they're people. And if we were to look at it through the lens of God absolutely is passionate about all of his creation and has a desire to reach them and connect with them, we should really be vehicles of enacting that, being hands and feet demonstrative of that connection space first and foremost. So I love how you've described that so much. That's incredibly profound. I just wanted to go
You
back.
put it better in 4 words. People are not projects.
They're not projects. They're not. But I think that's a very real thing. And I think you raised such a valid point. I think it particularly in sometimes the approaches to ideas of what evangelism should look like, that is like, I'm here to do a job to convince you to a certain way of philosophy or a certain way of mindset of thinking. And where I understand where that's coming from and all good, the important thing is people, God loves people. He wants to connect with them first. And that should be our priority too, and leave the rest to him. He caught us. He's very capable to get the rest of the 6 billion, if that makes sense. So it's having that kind of, see it as a privileged opportunity to partner with that action, to partner with that love kind of electricity or that energy that you're saying, and be part of what he wants to do in that. But it is going to pan out the way that he sees fit, and be okay with it, I think. I just wanted to go back a little bit to what you mentioned about responsible journalism. And obviously, you've been in this field for most of your life. Literally, I think 16 years old is such a long time to be in this. And consistently so, it doesn't sound like there's been a veering on kind of like career path there. And I really respect and admire that, because I think we're living in an era where many people take different career paths. I think for myself, I've always seen myself as a storyteller. It just has looked different in different kind of platforms and areas of occupation. But you mentioned about what does it take to be responsible in journalism and the media? We find that this is a space that is not always trusted. How have you found navigating that? And what do you think helps to maintain that sense of integrity as someone who occupies media space?
Gosh, that's such a good question. Pause to think about this. I'm going to answer this aware that it's quite subjective. So sometimes I write for publications that people might consider to be, that they might have problems with, right? Okay. That even I might have problems with. I can't say any more than that, but we're just going to leave that there. Right? Because whether you're writing or making stories for the BBC or ITV or Channel 4 or the Mail or the Guardian or the Telegraph or the Independent, every single one of those big name platforms come with a set of values and an agenda. And if you're working in those kinds of areas, you are sometimes going to find yourself ill at ease with their agendas. Right? For different reasons. And I've worked right across the gamut of national titles, as well as for a lot of specialist ones. And oftentimes I recently wrote something in a church-related publication, and I was absolutely horrified at one of the other things that I read in that publication. Right, so this is going to happen all the time. So I'm afraid it comes back down to the way that you do your business personally. I'm afraid it does that. If in the interview, if in the encounter, if in the way that you write it up, if in your dealings with the newsroom or your dealings with an editor or a publisher or your family, you're a person of integrity, then that will shine through. That will find its way. I'm struggling to answer the question because it's such a broad field that the question can only really be answered in the specific, in a specific case, right? Because you might think, You might think, oh, well, it's easy if you can just find the group, the publication or the group of people or community that have the same values as you, and then you can work from within your value system, and that will all be happy. And that's and I can see people go off and write for the Guardian for that reason, or they go off and write for the Telegraph, or they go off and write for Christianity magazine, or whatever it is, because that feels supportive. But my question is, how is anyone else going to get to share your values if you don't do it in the other places too? And if I write a piece for the Mail that is an interview, it might just be an arts and culture interview with somebody famous, and you might think, well, that's just showbiz. It's still an encounter with somebody in a room. They're still talking about the things that really matter to them.
Yeah.
They're still talking about stuff that comes up. I've done ones recently that were about drugs, about depression, about addiction, about families. Stuff still comes up even in those situations. And I have to trust that in the interview and in the writing and in the publication, my values will come through. And if they don't, if they start to be suppressed or they get warped, I'll just walk away, because I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to service other people's values. Wow. So there you go. I don't know. I'm floundering for an answer, but that's the best I can do.
That was a fantastic answer, and I love that you said that it's not necessarily straightforward. We can look at it as a like an overarching element, but like you said, it's bringing the authenticity of your values wherever it is that you find yourself in the room. And you might be in a place that is not necessarily somewhere that you'll know that, okay, I'm obviously not here by accident, but like you said, how will others know unless I'm in a position to share it? And that's an interesting kind of take on it. And I think something that we do need to be open to. This has been an incredible conversation, Cole. Thank you so much for being with us here at Faith in Media. I would love you, if you would not mind, just sharing with us just one piece of advice. Here at Christians in Media, we've got a lot of young, aspiring journalists, broadcasters, interviewers, those trying to get into the media space. What's a piece of advice that you could leave with them as they kind of get on their journey?
Calm down. Relax. Because I know, I see it, and I hear it, I hear people, and I understand that you come into this field and you've got so much pressure on you. You want to do it right. You want to be truthful. You want to be true to your values. You've also got possibly, the church leaning on you. Oh, you're going out there. We're going to, out you go. And you see you've got much more pressure on you than somebody who's just trying to make their way in the world from another perspective, because as Christians, we make it all mean something, in a way that other people don't have to deal with, right?
Such wisdom and such gold. I know that I have absolutely taken half of that on board for myself first, and anyone else who comes across this conversation, you're welcome. Cole, it's been an absolute pleasure. We are so excited, and hopefully we'll be able to see such a surge in response to your recent publication of Everything is Extraordinary, and people get to learn more about you that we've been able to share on today's podcast episode. Thank you so much. God bless, and wishing you all of the best over this festive season. You've been listening to Faith in Media with Carla Adebekun. Make sure you catch our episodes and hit subscribe. Please share and leave us a comment. Christians in Media is a UK charity that supports, encourages and inspires Christians from across the ever-changing media landscape. Find out more at www.christiansinmedia.co.uk and connect with us via our socials.